This is the injury report presented by NYU Langone Health. Both the Giants and the Jets had some key players go down with injuries at some point last season. So let's talk with Dr. Daniel J. Kaplan, Sports Orthopedic Surgeon over at NYU Langone Health, to get an idea of where these guys can be at in terms of their rehab and if they're healthy enough to turn up on these off-season workouts. Doc, what's going on, man? How are you feeling?
Brandon, thanks for having me back.
Jets and Giants fans, we've been waiting to put last season to bed, but I guess we can kind of do it now when we talk about these injuries. We'll start with Giants starting left tackle Andrew Thomas. His Liz Frank injury happened week 6, and he had surgery on October 15th of 2024. That's 4 months out from the surgery, Doc. Where's he at now in terms of rehab?
So a Liz Frank injury is one in which there's either a ligamentous or bony disruption of a connection between one of the bones in your foot and the base of the second metatarsal, which is the bone that connects to your toe. Beyond the bony or ligament difference, there's also a difference in energy associated with the injury types. So there's what's called a sporty Liz Frank injury, which is a twist, and that's usually what football players get, and it's lower energy. Or there's more of a traumatic Liz Frank, which is something you'd get from a car running over your foot or something like that. So both are treated surgically, but that type of surgery can be different. So for Thomas, who almost certainly had the sporty variety, patients are typically kept non-weight bearing for about 6 weeks, then gradually work themselves back. So rehab is focused primarily on ankle flexibility, since that foot will have been immobilized for an extended period of time. So this is a little different than an Achilles, which we'll discuss later, but the typical timeline for return to sport for a high-level athlete like him is around that 4-month mark. So he should be getting ready to go.
All right, and the Giants have one of the best training staffs in the NFL. Shout out to Ronnie Barnes. But your everyday athlete, your weekend warrior, our friends, they don't have access to that type of treatment. So what would the timeline look for, someone who plays basketball on the weekends or a little beer in hand kickball? What would that timeline be for them on their rehab and recovery?
The beer kickball person, I might just tell it to hang it up at that point. But for everyone else, just like you said, we don't get access to the same sorts of world-class trainers, nutritionists. They're being looked at every single day, being worked on. So for any weekend warrior person, in general, you should add at least 3 months, I think, to their recovery timeline.
All right, let's move on. Talk about Dexter Lawrence, Pro Bowler. But he was placed on season-ending IR on December 2nd of 2024 with a dislocated elbow. If the Giants were still in contention of a playoff spot, I think he could have come back at some point. He was at the Pro Bowl games, but he didn't really have to compete or do anything strenuous to that to the elbow. Does the elbow affect any of his off-season training? Like, is he now clear to get after it?
Yeah, so people are probably more familiar with shoulder dislocations, which are much more common. So unlike elbows, the shoulder is mostly held in place by soft tissue as opposed to the bones fitting tightly together. So this gives our shoulder, this tremendous range of motion, but it also increases the risk of dislocation.
Okay.
And then additionally, if a shoulder dislocates, it usually tears the tissue holding it in place, increasing the risk of future dislocations. So that's exactly what we saw with Julius Randle when he started having repeat dislocations needing surgery. Elbows, on the other hand, have much less motion. They can only flex and extend and then rotate. This is because the joint has much more what we call congruity, meaning the bones fit tightly together and the joint isn't as reliant on soft tissue to hold it in place. So not only does that make dislocations of the elbow more rare, but for a simple dislocation, you're not necessarily at any higher risk for future dislocations. Yeah. So I don't have access to his MRI, but assuming there are no other injuries involved, there shouldn't be any long-term negative consequences. And at this point, he should be able to get back into training.
All right, good news for Giants fans, because this dude, when he extends, he put the center in a quarterback's lap. Dexter Lawrence is, a bright spot on this team. Let's flip on over and talk about the Jets. Their biggest injury, or one of their biggest injuries, was to a guy, edge rusher, Jermaine Johnson. He suffered season-ending Achilles injury in week 2, and he had surgery September 20th of 2024. Earlier this month, he saw a doctor who said everything was looking perfect. So where's he at in terms of his rehab, and when is Jermaine going to get back on the field?
Man, as a surgeon, I love the confidence from that guy saying everything's looking perfect right now. In general, it takes around 10 to 12 months to return to sports after an Achilles repair. Now, regarding recovery, so unlike the Liz Frank we discussed earlier, which is about stabilizing the foot, the Achilles tendon is all about push-off strength. So the tendon is like a rope that connects your calf muscle to your foot, and a functioning rope is required for the muscle to pull on the foot to plantar flex or push down to generate that explosive power. So for a lineman, as you know, their career is based on explosive power in those first few steps as they, get off the line immediately, meaning they are incredibly reliant on that functioning Achilles. That's part of the reason why it takes so long to come back from an injury like this is even after the tendon heals, there's typically a lot of muscle atrophy, meaning the muscles got weaker, there's stiffness of the ankle, and then there's loss of proprioception, which means understanding how your ankle moves in space. So you really need to relearn how to walk to a degree. So 5 months out from surgery now, more or less, he's most likely working on rebuilding that strength and working on motion, but also getting his coordination back, learning how to, walk with his connecting his foot to his calf to his thigh. That can be the hardest part. And like we saw with Aaron Rodgers and Kirk Cousins, mobility can be limited in the season following Achilles, largely because of that.
Oh man, this guy has the three B's in football: the bend, break, and burst. So hopefully he's still that athletic edge rusher that can come off the edge and help this Jets defense in 2024. Another young guy that's a core piece for the Jets, Olu Fashanu, suffered an injury to his plantar fascia on December 22nd. That was a game against the Rams. He didn't need surgery, but anyone who knows about this injury knows that this is something that can linger on if it's not healed. So what's his rehab looking like? What's this, 2 months out?
Yeah. So the plantar fascia is some tissue that connects your heel to the front of your foot. Inflammation of this tissue, called plantar fasciitis, is pretty common and something a lot of us have probably had and can be treated with a good stretching regimen. Tears of the fascia are much more rare. Fortunately, as in Alu's case, they almost never require surgery and can be treated initially with casting. Return to sport for this is hyper variable, though, and is really dependent upon the player's level of pain caused by the tearing and more importantly, the extent of the tear. So they may monitor the condition with MRIs to ensure it's healing as expected. He should be able to return to by training camp, but just like you said, these can linger and can recur. So it's something we have to keep a close eye on.
Last question, Doc. We always talk about how the injuries can affect your mental. Out of these four injuries, which player do you think is going to have to work on like the mental aspect of feeling like he's injured and being able to like really get out there and feel like he's 100%?
Yeah, the mental component of sports after an injury is huge because these are traumatic injuries. You went from being an all world level athlete and then have something, in your foot feel like it exploded. So that's terrifying. And getting back out there after something like this is hard. Even if you're physically ready, sometimes the mental component is much tougher. My guess would be for these, I think the Achilles is probably the most traumatic in that setting. You feel like someone shot you in the back of the leg. You went from being able to walk, run, jump to not being able to move your foot well. I think mentally, probably that's the toughest one to come back from. But I'm sure Jermaine Johnson will do great.
Very interesting. Doc, thanks for joining us today. And now you got some Jets and Giants fans with a smile on their faces, knowing that some of their top players are going to be healthy for next season. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.